All right, it is indeed 4 minutes after 7 p.m. on this rather chilly, I suppose it's a question of where you are located, it's rather chilly Thursday evening here in Cape Town. My name is Kaya Sitole and welcome to this latest installment of the Kagiso Trust Active Citizenry Twitter Conversations series. So we've had conversations a couple of weeks ago about some of the key challenges affecting the country and how we can assist or put up our hands as individuals. So today's conversation, we're going to be focusing on a rather important question of the sanctity of public infrastructure, whether we're talking about libraries, schools, parks, or even some of the infrastructure that delivers goods and services to us. We wanted to have a conversation about how should we treat it, how should we essentially ensure that it remains viable throughout all the changes that we see in our different societies. We'd like you to spread the word. So if you can retweet and make more people aware that we are indeed having this conversation, that would be much appreciated. The format of this particular space is that I will be speaking to a panel of experts who have some particular insights that they'd like to share about essentially the state of public infrastructure, our roles and responsibilities, and the duties of elected officials towards the maintenance and indeed the provision of public infrastructure. We'd also obviously like to hear from you what you've observed in your own communities. Is there an awareness about the importance of public and social infrastructure? And what happens when things go wrong? Where do we turn to in order to ensure that these very, very valuable assets are indeed maintained? So that is the format that we're going to take forward. And how we'd like you to participate is that you simply raise your hand and then we'll note you and then we'll elevate you to the position of speaker so that you can share your voice and you can tell us what you think about this rather important topic. Not to waste time, I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to my panelists. And firstly, I do have Mangone Nzaba, who is the chairperson of Kagiso Trust, who are our hosts today, and has also been actively involved in various elements of the Kagiso Shanduka Trust family. She has served on the board of KTH, this is Kagiso Tiso Holding, Kagiso Africa Investments, and also the advisory board of Kagiso Shanduka Trust. So she will be our first panelist in her capacity as someone who has a very intimate understanding of the work that Kagiso Trust in particular has played in relation to our public infrastructure. We'll also be joined by a good friend of mine, Dr. Stembele Mbete from the University of Pretoria. She is indeed in the Department of Political Sciences there, where she lectures in international relations and South African politics. So I can imagine with BRICS coming up, she's been remarkably busy. So we're very grateful for her having taken this time to actually join us in this particular conversation to give us some insights about some of the key challenges relating to the country's infrastructure assets. Our third panelist today is Professor Sam Goma, who is quite esteemed in the matters of public policy formulation and public policy deliberations. He has indeed formed part of a team of experts that developed the National Policy Development Framework, which was commissioned by the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation within the presidency. Over the years, he has delivered over 50 conference papers and published more than 20 articles in a variety of journals. So he is the one person who knows exactly how all these things need to be synthesized. He is currently the director of the School of Economics and Management in the Faculty of Management and Law in the University of Limpopo. So that is our panel today. But of course, you also form part of our panel because we'd like to hear from you, either through you tweeting us directly or indeed just putting up your hand so we can add you as a speaker. I would like to go to you first, Mangone. I mean, Kagiso has been involved in matters relating to addressing critical issues in the country for many years, even during the dark days of apartheid. It's an organization that has stayed true to that particular cause and has championed various initiatives aimed at ensuring that South Africa remains a country that through its challenges is still able to remind itself about the importance of making sure that society is able to see the type of services that we all believe we're entitled to. Talk us through some of the work that the Kagiso Trust has done, particularly in relation to matters relating to public and social infrastructure. Mangone, are you there?
Yes, Kaya, thank you very much, Kaya, and good evening. Good evening to fellow speakers, and good evening to the citizens. Yes, indeed, I am chairperson of the Kagiso Trust, And just to give a bit of a background to Kagiso Trust, for some of you, many of you will know about Kagiso Trust, but there could be a few of you who do not know about Kagiso Trust and the work that we do. And those of you who know about Kagiso Trust will remember very well that Kagiso Trust was established in the about 30 years ago, established really as an organization that would support people in South Africa, during the apartheid years when people were really suffering and people were in detention and children could not go to school. And the Kagiso Trust was established then. And throughout the years, Kagiso Trust has been known for its support for education. Some of you will know about our programs in the Free State and our programs in Limpopo, where we've been assisting with looking at schools that are not functional and assisting to get them functional, assisting district education departments and so on. But one then would ask, what are we doing here in this space? Kagiso Trust in the last 5 years has actually expanded its strategy to participate in issues of local governance, in issues of agriculture and socio-economic development. And it was during this time that we noticed some gaps and challenges in local government and local governance, that we established a program that actually looks at what are the needs in local government that actually support local governance. And one of those, we found out that it is actually public participation, citizens' participation, because there are all sorts of elements in local government. You find issues of revenue collection, issues of infrastructure development, and all other services that are provided by municipalities. But underlying all these services, the success really lies in the participation of citizens. As you were talking, Kaya, you talked a lot about infrastructure that is dilapidating, that is going derelict, and that is problematic. But it reaches this space because, in the first place, citizens were never involved in the planning, if there has been any, in the budgeting, in everything that goes around infrastructure development. We only pick up the pieces when the roads have become so dilapidated as we see them today, when there is no water, when sewerage is running into our homes, when municipal services are actually on the brink of collapse. Actually, in many municipalities, these services have already collapsed, not on the brink of collapse. So we are saying, as citizens, what is the role of ourselves, each and every one of us, in making sure that municipalities function the way they are supposed to function? So that is the angle in which Kagiso Trust enters the municipal space. I will stop at that, Kaya. I think that is enough in terms of giving the background to Kagiso Trust. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I think obviously that background does give us a very proper context of the work that Kagiso Trust has been trying to do in that particular space. And I'm particularly keen on exploring further the question of how citizens can actually participate in processes that are informed by the need to obviously ensure public consultation before decisions about public policy are made. So I'll definitely come back to you on that one. Dr. Mbete, I mean, you have obviously been a keen observer and a keen commentator on some of these public policy matters. In fact, even now in your role as the director of programs at Future Elect, you are indeed focusing on leadership training for public leaders so that they know how, to engage in public policy formulation. When you look around the country, when you drive around the country and you see the state and indeed the profile of public infrastructure, do you see a country that has an intimate appreciation of the importance of public assets and resources?
Hi, Kaya. Well, the answer to that question is no, not really. And I think that part of it stems from us not really understanding the nature of the infrastructure that we have as a public good. You'll know this as somebody who I think you did study a bit of economics at some point in your degree, this idea that a public good being a commodity or a service or good that is available to all members of society, that no one can be excluded from using, and that we can all benefit from, and that is provided for usually by the state, by governments, and that we all pay for through taxation. And every South African is a taxpayer, whether you pay income tax, whether you pay PAYE, whether you pay VAT. We are all contributing to the country's fiscus. And in return, what we should be receiving from the government is these public goods, proper roads that are well maintained and that help us get to and fro safely, street lights, libraries, properly functioning hospitals, schools with toilets, with flushing toilets, and proper sanitation. And these are amongst the public goods that are provided by governments and that are meant to, and in part of the social contract that we enter into with the people that govern. And what we also have in South Africa is a constitutional system, a constitution that mandates public participation in planning processes and budgeting processes at all levels of government, particularly at the municipal level. And this was intended to form the basis of, firstly, equitable provision of infrastructure to all South Africans, regardless of race or class, as a way of redress and restitution from our past, but also to provide a sense of common ownership of our national infrastructure, and at provincial level and at local level, this sense amongst us as people living in South Africa of a common ownership of the public goods that we have. And so whether they are physical infrastructure or whether they are kind of the social infrastructure of health services, education, etc. And unfortunately, I think what's happened acutely in the last few years is that our sense of common ownership, of public ownership of our public goods has declined. And so we have seen, firstly, government and government officials really being negligent in their duty to maintain infrastructure, but also to provide new infrastructure to areas that require it. And then we've also seen on the other side, citizens destroying infrastructure as a way of expressing their anger and their dissatisfaction with the country's politics. And the combination of these two sort of forces has resulted in a massive deterioration in our infrastructure over the last few years. And in fact, if you consider our transport infrastructure, for example, the rail networks, our logistics infrastructure, and how much that has almost physically been dismantled in the last 3 years since COVID.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mbete. And I think obviously there's a lot of very critical points that you're raising that I want to come back to. But at this point, I want to bring in Professor Goma. Professor Goma, one of the points that Dr. Mbete has just raised is something that we all regard as, a persistent tragedy. And that is the tragedy of citizens feeling aggrieved with a particular level of government and then simply then going to target public infrastructure. I think in the past couple of days, we've seen that in Swellendam, where the citizens decided to burn down the municipal buildings. We've seen it in Vuwani many years ago, where the schools became the target. And there's many more iterations of that across the country for a variety of reasons. When we then look at those particular types of behaviors, is this an acknowledgement by those citizens that, look, this is indeed the type of infrastructure that is so important, the state will fix it, whatever we do to it? Or is it simply a matter of people being unaware of the importance of these particular assets and then simply saying, well, it has a government name, so therefore let us trash it? What drives this?
Yeah, thanks, Kaya, for the opportunity. And also, I want to align myself with the views of my fellow panelists, Dr. Mbete and also Mankoni. They're quite right in terms of stating the current situation we have around poor maintenance of public infrastructure and also inadequate public investment on infrastructure, but also coming back to your question. So, Kaya, my sense is that the philosophy of development that was adopted by the democratic government in 1994 was flawed, because the democratic government said to the citizens that now that a democratic government has been installed, sit back and wait for the government to provide basic services to you. For example, provision of houses and also provision of water and sanitation. And this has basically led to this lack of sense of ownership of these public assets by ordinary members of the public, and also a lack of buy-in because they have not been party to the process of the shaping of these development plans and also being part of the decision-making process, because most of these public infrastructure projects are decided in the boardroom. You have, of course, what they call public participation process, but we know that is simply for ticking the box in terms of compliance. But the substance of this public participation process is not meaningful, because ordinary citizens are not given the necessary space to express what their demands are, and also to be afforded an opportunity to have a say in the final shaping of this development project. So that has been the missing part in terms of how government approaches planning. So citizens are not placed at the center of this planning process in terms of these projects, and also looking at the implementation of the projects. And that's the reason, to a large extent, you have ordinary citizens, if they embark on a protest, the first thing they target is a public infrastructure in the form of a library or the torching of a school, and also the destroying of or destruction of public facilities in the main. So we need to change the paradigm on the part of the government, but also bringing other programs like civic education in the communities, and also bring the issue of meaningful engagement with citizens by government institutions, so that we are able to have a broader participation and also sense of ownership on the part of the community. So you have, for example, public infrastructure projects. You have the Guyana Water Project that was initiated in 2010 at an estimated taxpayers cost of 3 billion rand. It's almost 10 years. This project has not been completed, because the project is meant to benefit about 55 villages with clean water. You also have unfinished housing projects in many parts of the country, but the money has been allocated, but these projects have not been completed. And that's the reason when communities embark on a protest, they also target some of these projects, because they have a sense that money has been spent, but the project has not come to fruition in terms of benefiting the members of the community. And also, public infrastructure is key in driving the economy. And if you refer to the latest IMF report released recently, of course, it projects that our economy will grow by 2% if Transnet and Eskom are fixed. We have to fix Transnet because, as Dr. Mbete alluded to, you need reliable, effective railway system, logistics, to ensure that there's proper movement of these goods, your food supplies, your raw materials, and other basic goods as part of propelling the economy into higher economic growth rates. So those are the key issues that needs to be prioritized and also factored in terms of our public discourse. Thanks.
Professor, when we look at perhaps an example of what we've seen in recent years in relating to Hammanskraal, where clearly the water infrastructure was not adequately maintained over a long period of time, and you saw what the consequences of that. From some of the research that you've done and the observations that you've had, do we have a very clear policy regarding the maintenance of what already exists, even before we engage in building new capacity in terms of social and public infrastructure? Do we take care of what we already have?
Yes, Kaya, so the planning is there, money is there, but what has been lamented about on numerous occasions, also by the Auditor General and other key role players, is a lack of capacity on the part of government institutions to spend, for example, infrastructure grant in the case of municipalities, because there is inadequate technical skills resident in these municipalities in the form of engineering skills, because municipalities are not attracting the right talent to be employed in these municipalities to be able to, one, ensure that there's proper project planning and also project management in terms of ensuring that these capital projects are properly executed. And also you have this problem that provinces and municipalities, when you look at their budget, the bigger chunk of the budget is channeled towards operating budget and less on capital projects. So that also is contributing to this state of inadequate infrastructure that we have, but also aging infrastructure that is not properly looked into in terms of maintenance and also public investment to revive some of this public infrastructure. So in the main, you have these inadequacies and also inefficiencies in the system in terms of getting the right people to drive some of these development projects.
Yeah. Mankone, I want to follow up with you on what I refer to as the custody gap, where obviously those that should be the custodians of these particular assets either don't do their jobs or they simply just don't do it adequately. From some of the work that you guys as Kagiso have done in different communities, is this something that is at the core face of the problem, where those that have been given the responsibility to oversee and maintain these very critical assets quite simply redirect the funds elsewhere, or even worse, don't even care about these assets and how they should be protected?
Yes, Kaya, I was listening very attentively to Ntate. We can't really paint every municipality and every government department with the same paintbrush, but we find a trend that is worrying, that is on a downward trajectory, whereby the people who are employed, especially at the local government level, are really, some of them shouldn't be there at all. One wonders how they got there, because they are not. We're talking about planning here. We're talking about budgeting. We're talking about asset management. We're talking about asset accounting. We're talking about, asset under construction. All those things that your qualified project manager is able to talk about and able to follow through. But if such a person does not even exist in a municipality, how do we then expect such a municipality to be able to prepare even financial statements that actually state their assets and liabilities? They're not able to, because they're not qualified to do that. And if they can't do that, then the Auditor General comes with that big stick, which we all know about. But apart from that, I wanted to touch upon the issue of citizen participation. Excuse me. There is legislation in South Africa, many pieces of legislation that actually talk about providing space for public participation in decision-making processes in government. Yes, that is on paper, but how is it being operationalized? There is absolutely no mechanism that actually assists in operationalizing these laws and policies. As one of my co-presenters said, it's a matter of compliance. People are called for 1 or 2 days, consulted, that is called a consultation, And that's about it. Beyond that, people, ordinary citizens, do not find space to participate. Let's take, for instance, power relations in a municipality. Once you take the council and you take public servants on the one side and you take citizens on the other side, power relations completely change and are inclined to support the municipal council and the officials. Citizen spaces are squeezed. Some citizens don't even know that they actually have a right to sit in council meetings and to make inputs into budgets. Some of them know, but they don't have the resources. They hardly have transport to get to those places where they should be making those inputs. So we are saying we should, together with everybody in the country who has the capacity and the knowledge and the resources, empower citizens to participate in this decision making and in this planning. Because otherwise, when people have not participated, they don't know where the infrastructure came from. They don't quite care. The first thing that they attack is the very infrastructure. But whereas if they had been part of that planning and of that establishment of that infrastructure, their attitudes towards that infrastructure, because now it belongs to the citizens, it does not belong to the municipality, then perhaps the way the citizens would have due care for such infrastructure would be different. So at this point in time, Kaya, citizens are literally shut out of the municipal planning and activities. And all the projects that we see, there is hardly any inputs that are made by the citizens. So because of the reasons that I've given, I think one of the solutions is to all of us try and run those empowerment programs, that citizen education, giving people information. And then I wanted to also touch on another thing. This legislation that I'm talking about, some of it has passed its use by date, in the sense that when it was enacted, the situation on the ground was quite different to what it is today. And it needs to be reviewed. And in that review, there has to be space created for citizen participation, not just on paper, but spaces and management of those power relations that I talked about earlier.
Magone, I have one particular question in relation to that. I mean, I, as a citizen, for example, don't need to be told by anyone that it's not right to burn a school or to burn a library or to burn any form of public infrastructure. So is this the idea that we need to teach people, not perhaps incentivizing the type of wrong behaviors where people can say, well, no one told me it was wrong to burn a school? I mean, surely this is something that we must all instinctively know without anyone having to sit us down and say, oh, by the way, this is why it's wrong to burn a school?
I think everybody, even those who are burning a school, all of them know that what they're doing is wrong. But they are just weaponizing that. They can't hide behind the fact that they do not know it is wrong. We all know it is wrong. And even those who are burning the school or digging up a road, they know it is wrong. I think what is important is to bring citizens closer to the infrastructure development programs, because we can shout at the top of the mountains, we can tell people over and over and over and over again. They know very well that what they are doing is wrong. It's just that they do not have a relationship with that infrastructure because they've been shut out in the first place. So for me, a program that I believe would optimize what we are trying to do is not just to tell people that what they're doing is wrong, but is to facilitate bringing them closer and closer to have a relationship with this infrastructure.
Thank you very much for that, Magone. If you've just joined us, we are talking active citizenry and the role and the importance of public infrastructure. This is a Twitter space hosted by the Kagiso Trust. We'd also like to hear from you. So if you want to comment, please do raise a hand so we can note you and then we can add you as a speaker. Dr. Mbete, I mean, when we speak about the types of behaviors that we've seen in relation to public infrastructure assets, where they've obviously, in many instances, been targeted by citizens, clearly it is citizens who have a very clear understanding that, these particular assets are assets that have been created by the state or overseen by the state. So therefore, because we're angry at something that the state has done, this is what we must do in order to punish them. Is there an awareness that even though the state may be the custodian, maybe the oversight agent, it is actually doing so on behalf of citizens? Because if the awareness is there, surely nobody's going to be burning this thing to punish a government.
Well, I think that our sense collectively of what it means to be citizens in a democracy not particularly strong. And, we don't have civic education at school level. There's no particular agency or any part of government that is singularly responsible for civic education. The IEC does have a mandate to promote civic education, but that's just about it. And so because of that, I think that our common understanding of what it means to be a citizen in a democracy and what the rights and the responsibilities of citizens are, and then also of governments and government officials, I think aren't as properly developed as they should be. And so that's, I think, a first thing. But the second thing is that officials, both politicians as well as civil servants at all levels of the state, have proven to be really unresponsive to citizens' grievances. And so people do try to, send petitions, to have meetings with their public representatives, to try and do things. If you look at the situation with the Rooiwal water treatment plant, for example, in Hammanskraal, that's an issue, and that's a crisis that is well over 15 years, nearly 20 years in the making. And people having raised concerns about this over years. And what we've had is a state and government officials that are just not responsive. But what people do know is that if you burn something, firstly, you get the media's attention. And then once the media has your attention, then politicians follow. And so in many ways, the destruction of infrastructure is a rational response to our dysfunctional relationship with our politicians and with our dysfunctional and a rational response to our dysfunctional relationship with our, with officials who are supposed to be making decisions, doing the consultations, who are supposed to be responding to the grievances of the citizens and to the people that they govern over. So when Fikile Mbalula says, you've got a tap, it doesn't matter where there's water that comes out of it or not. Everyone's got access to infrastructure. And that sort of callousness, I think, that comes from some quarters is what then results in citizens wanting to take the most extreme action to get a response from government and from their government officials. And I think the only way, as my fellow panelists have said, to try to start to address some of these is to use the mechanisms that we already have. I mean, just a month ago, just over a month now, the Constitutional Court in its Mkhale judgment, raised issues again about the public participation process around the law making of the traditional and Khoisan Leaders Act, and that there just had not been enough public consultation. So all the mechanisms are there, they just are not being used the way that they were intended to be used by politicians and by officials.
Dr. Mbete, I mean, surely we have to distinguish between historic legacy assets, so, the type of infrastructure that's been there forever, and there by consequence, there wouldn't have been a process of engaging citizens to say, do you want a union building to be here or not, versus new infrastructure that might be popping up, where, of course, under the new constitutional dispensation, then indeed the requirement for public consultation is acutely defined then. in relation to old and legacy assets, how do we get people to warm up to the idea that, well, actually, now that it's an asset of the country, it is indeed an asset that belongs to you. So therefore, you must treat it with the same sense of caution. Because I'm worried about the idea that people are going to start believing that destroying public infrastructure is a legitimate cause of action because, well, if government is not here to listen to us, they will definitely listen once there's a window that's been broken. It might be creating unintended consequences for the type of society we want to build.
Well, no, I'm not promoting that as a way of engaging with government. I'm saying that that is what we have seen, right? Is that people are already engaging like this. It's not, and that is deeply problematic and deeply wrong, and we need to find ways to address that. So I just want to correct that. Is that my explanation was that I think a lot of what, and certainly with the people that have studied this and have spoken to communities who do protest, and where the protests do turn destructive, is that this is the explanation that they are given. Is that, well, this is the last straw. You don't go out and the first thing you do is you burn a building. You know, you try to engage in all sorts of ways, and government is just not responsive. And so, so I think that that's one thing to understand. I think that the second thing to understand, and I think to think about, is around the sense of people having ownership of their of the assets that are available to them, and this idea that you know, the library, the clinic, the school, the community center are yours. They're public goods, they're public assets that belong to you, and that you should have access to and that you should be able to use. And I think that there are many places in the country where many of the public goods, whether that be a community hall, whether that be a public library, or we don't have enough public libraries, are not as accessible to communities as they should be. And so that ownership over those assets, I don't think is felt in the way that it should be. And that's with all that assets as well as ones that have been built since 1994. I mean, there's the story of two community centers, one in the Orange Grove area here in Johannesburg, and another in the west, the southwest of the city, where it was community centers with all sorts of infrastructure that were built 10 years ago, but that have never been opened because the municipalities haven't budgeted, the municipalities and the provincial government haven't budgeted for the people to staff them, and for the books to put into the libraries. And so it's not just enough to build the buildings, but you need to be thinking about the people that are going to use those buildings in order for them to be given life. And then a third thing that I want to say about old and legacy infrastructure is maintenance, because what we have seen is that many of our municipalities are not maintaining the infrastructure that we that it was inherited from the past. And so that infrastructure becomes more and more dilapidated, and that broken window sort of theory, that if you're not, if something is already destroyed and coming apart, then people are a lot less likely to want to look after it.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mbete. Professor Goma, I mean, I remember in particular in Vuwani, what happened there was that, look, the government says we're going to redefine the border. So the demarcation process says that you guys are now going to belong on this side of the fence. The citizens resisted, the citizens were ignored. And only after the schools were burning did government then say, oh, actually, perhaps there's something that needs to be addressed here. I'm just using that as one example of this particular problem that we have, where the paralysis in governance then essentially escalates the risk of public infrastructure assets being the targets of those citizens that are discontent for many reasons. How do we deal with that? And how has government allowed that to be essentially the model of getting reactions to particularly important, critical concerns by society?
Well, thanks, Kaya, for that. So basically, all these endemic problems we're facing have to do with poor public leadership. So the kind of leadership that gets elected to serve in municipalities and the other spheres of government seem not to be attuned to the mood on the ground, but also having a sense of having ability to respond properly to these demands, these expectations that get enlisted by members of the community, either through a petition or submitting a memorandum and all of that. And ordinary citizens have a sense that they are not being listened to and their demands are not being properly addressed. And that's the reason, of course, they will resort to a protest as part of registering their displeasure. So until such time, we have the right people that are deployed in some of these political positions, especially in the context of municipalities, and also having leaders that are fit for purpose, because the demands and expectations of communities have evolved since 1994. The demographics have changed. We now have a youngish population, and their expectations and demands are totally different from the other segments of the population. So we need to have leaders who will be able to come up with solutions, but also working with the communities to find these solutions and also to meaningfully engage with the citizens as part of identifying their needs, coming up with the mechanisms or the interventions that collectively they can plan around and also look into proper implementation. So that has been one of the contributing factors to the current situation we have across the country in terms of the lack of a sense of agency on the part of public institutions or government institutions in terms of tackling these socioeconomic conditions that faces the country. But also we should not also leave the factor of factional politics that are quite prevalent in the governing party that also have a spin-off in terms of the destruction of public property or public assets as part of addressing their disagreements and also their tensions within the governing party. So that also, in terms of empirical evidence, has been attributed to this kind of situation we face in the country around the issue of destruction of public assets or property and other related assets. Just also to give an example, I remember some few years ago in the Mkondo local municipality, there was a service delivery protest that led to the torching of a community library. And when one of the protesters was asked, why are you embarking on this protest and why did you resort to this? And his answer was that, no, we discovered that this library has a lot of books that are written about apartheid. But of course, I think he was just giving a lame explanation to cover for their unreasonable and also undesirable reaction to the situation. So as my panelists also flagged the issue of ongoing civic education, community empowerment, and also I have a sense that it's high time we change the model of service delivery in South Africa and focus more on public-public partnerships that largely accommodate communities, either in the form of community cooperatives, NGOs, civil society groups, as part of providing some of these services, but also the construction of these assets. We know the history. Before 1994, most of communities, schools, community libraries, and other facilities were constructed by community members through making their own contributions. And that's the reason we need to reignite that spirit of civic duty and also ensure that there is meaningful participation of community members in the provisioning of these basic services. And that basically speaks to the whole notion of de-tenderizing the state. Okay? Communities need to be empowered to be able to participate in the form of contributing to the construction of these public assets, and thus ensuring that at the end of the day, there's a sense of ownership on the part of the community members, and also there is a sense that they can protect this asset that they contributed to its construction. So those are some of the thinking that needs to be looked into, and also government, and also broadly civil society, community members, we need to start thinking about.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Sam. If you guys would like to also raise your hand and sort of put your voice into this conversation, please feel free to do so. We will be taking some of your insights here. Mangane, I mean, you know, when we do talk about the need for citizens to not only be aware of the importance of public and social assets, but also play an active role in making sure that, you know, they are at the very least not damaged, in other words, protect them. What have you guys seen on the ground when you've been working with particular communities? How easy is it to sort of sell the idea that actually it has a government, you know, masthead, it has a government logo, but it actually belongs to you because this is your government? Have you found that to be an easy conversation to sell amongst communities where Kagiso has done some work?
It's still a very new area that we are exploring, because, as Prof has just indicated, you would find that all the work is tenderized. A tender is given out, somebody comes in, does the job, gets out, takes the money, and is gone. And the community does not even know who that person was or who that company was. So where people are involved in, you know, sourcing labor from localities, sourcing this, sourcing that, it makes a huge difference in terms of people protecting. Actually, you don't even need the policing of that asset. People simply just protect that asset without having to call the police to protect such an asset, because they've been involved. They have even benefited, apart from benefiting from the usage of that infrastructure. They have benefited in the construction of that infrastructure. Sometimes it's not even benefiting financially. They have this good feeling that they were part of the establishment of that infrastructure. So we find that where people have been respected, involved, and given space to participate, it makes a whole lot of a difference. Another thing that we have found is that, you know, when 1994 came and the democratic government came, I don't know whether it's organizational skills or what, people's organizing abilities were sort of put in the back burner, and we sort of all looked up to the democratic government to do everything. And that organizational culture of organizing, of being in groups, of supporting each other, sort of took a backseat. We find that people are not organized. You find that it's an individual here and individual there. Once they start organizing, then they revert back to their political formations. There used to be organizing of communities outside political formations or outside political parties. And we find that it works better if organizing in communities takes that model. So the issue of having organized communities, helping them and empowering them, then it helps in that it becomes easier, so much easier for government and the communities and citizens involved to really work together, rather than one, it looks like the government side has more power and the citizens do not have power at all. So the issue of empowerment of citizens becomes key and critical in terms of participation that we are talking about. And where that has happened, we have seen a thawing of relationships between, if not us and them, it is the citizens of a specific municipality working together.
Yeah, and you know, we remember during the July riots in particular, where you saw some community members then coming out, either defending the streets or either defending shopping centers and things like that. And I think obviously for a lot of those particular communities, perhaps there's a greater sense of awareness that, look, all of these things have got consequences. If we allow someone to destroy this, it's going to cost us. Is this the type of attitude that we see far too infrequently? In other words, there aren't too many communities across the country that have that same attitude, which would do a lot in order to address some of the damage that we see in public infrastructure.
Attitudes between citizens and government are hardening, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to. Attitudes are hardening, and for as long as people see this infrastructure belonging to government and not belonging to them, it will not be protected at all. But where there have been some form of empowerment and attitudes are softening, it makes a difference. We have noted with that in those areas where citizens and public servants and political councillors have come together and developed one vision for the municipality, life becomes so much easier because now they are working together. The citizens begin to understand that the assets actually belong to them, but do not belong to the government. Where does government get money? Government gets money from our taxes, and this means these are our assets. If these are our taxes, so it's something that really needs the type of civic education that needs to go to really penetrate through and get to the citizens.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mbete, the work that you guys do at Future Elect is essentially geared towards driving a greater awareness of the politics in our political system, because as it turns out, a lot of citizens actually don't know how these things work and how these things don't work. In the work that you've done already, do you see perhaps there is a scope to drive greater acknowledgement or greater awareness at the grassroots level about where public infrastructure fits in, who's got the responsibility for what, and why it actually is important for everyone to have that universal understanding of what all these assets are about? Or is it still something that perhaps is, I don't know, what's the status of the awareness across the system?
Yes, definitely. What we found is that awareness just generally across the system and across society, it's not just one part of society that needs this awareness, but really even the most educated people have a very poor understanding. Even the most formally educated people, in terms of having degrees, in whatever way, have very poor understanding of how the system actually works in the way that it's supposed to work. And so we've developed a program that is going to be launched at the end of the month, a civic education program that is aimed at teaching, at providing the resources on this online and in an app, and then also working with organizations to be able to teach it on the ground in areas that have poor access to data and all of those things. Just one thing that I wanted to add, a dimension I wanted to add to this conversation, I do think that a lot of this also comes down to needing to have a professional civil service, because really so many people that we have in our public service, as Mankona was referring to, are just not able to address the infrastructure challenges that we have, which is why we also see this abuse of the tender system. And so I think that there's no easy fix to this, but I think it is something that can be addressed with focused effort by people across the spectrum of society, both civil society and government as well.
No, thank you very much for that, Dr. Mbete. Professor, we've had this conversation now. We've obviously also become quite aware that there are clearly some persistent issues relating to the awareness about these issues, and also perhaps the way in which we articulate them from the academic perspective. Is this the type of thing where perhaps even at universities we should be able to put together the type of programs that enable people to then essentially understand how all this fits together? Or is it something that universities are probably already doing it in one way or another?
Oh yeah, thanks, Kaya, for that. So universities are part of the community. We are morally and also legally bound to ensure that we come up with programs to impart knowledge, conscientize the society around issues of civic responsibility, citizenship, and also ensuring that the programs that we have does add value in the bigger scheme of things. So we are duty bound to ensure that the knowledge that we impart to our students through the various programs does infuse the element of community empowerment, social awareness around a variety of issues that faces the country. We also dedicate programs related to, for example, the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which in the main obligates member states to end poverty, hunger, and also look at other pertinent issues. We also touch on government planning frameworks and also how government ought to optimize its work with a view to respond to the needs and also expectations of members of the community. So we also provide capacity development largely to councillors who are in the different municipalities, and also customizing some of the programs that we provide to deal with the specific needs that they've flagged as requiring attention. But I believe that we can intensify our efforts as part of providing this ongoing capacity development in tandem with community members, because community members also are expected to be part of these processes and also these empowerment programs, and also ensure that at the end of the day, they have the right skills and knowledge to be able to assert their rights, assert their needs, and also expectations. So we have a lot of work to do as public universities. Thanks.
Thanks to you for those insights, Professor, and it's definitely something that we probably do want to focus on at a deeper level in our future conversations. Mankonde, the last word for you. I mean, obviously, Kagiso Trust does a lot of work in sort of trying to address some of the key challenges that we face as society. If people wanted to sort of get more insight into the type of work that you've done, particularly in community engagement, how do they access that? And more importantly, if people wanted to then do something on the basis of what they know that you do, what can they do? And how can they join these particular partnerships?
You know, one of the principles at Kagiso Trust is to work in partnership. I mean, there's no institution, no matter how big, including government, that can do it alone. We work in partnerships with organizations that have the same vision, same values, and have the same expectations. Therefore, we are open to discussions with a variety of organizations to form partnerships in terms of doing the work that we do. But I must hasten to say, the work we do is not the panacea for development. We have a lot to learn from others. Therefore, these partnerships become particularly important in doing so. I invite people to really follow our Twitter page or our X page, follow us on Facebook, follow us our Instagram page. We also have a website where people can actually look at the work that we are doing and engage with us, share ideas, and perhaps we'll be able to empower one another. But as a parting shot, I'd like to say, you know, all that we are talking about today is really to bring about meaningful measures for accountability, be it at national, provincial, or local government. And that accountability will come if citizens demand it, and really pressurizing those who are in power, whether political power or public service, to really be accountable to the citizens. So I hope this conversation can carry on so that we can, in the future, then talk about how do we then demand and force that accountability.
Dr. Mbete, final word from you. when citizens want to wake up tomorrow and say, I actually want to do something, I actually want to do something differently in my community, what is the one thing that you want them to be able to understand about the importance of public infrastructure?
Look, I think that the one thing that I'd want them to understand if they want to make a difference in their community is to find out what is happening at their councils. You know, we can all attend our municipal council meetings. There's only a small fraction of them that are blocked from the public, but find out about them, find out what the planning processes are and what is happening in your municipality. And then secondly, to really take an interest in your public infrastructure and find out what is it that you can do to look after it, you know. So become a friend of your library, know where the substations and everything are in your neighborhood, so that you can then take an active interest in looking after the infrastructure that is around you, and engage your local councillors and engage your PR councillors as well. So your ward councillors and your PR councillors, just in where you live. Is just really important to look after the infrastructure around you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbete. Professor, final word from you?
Oh yeah, thanks, Kyle, for that. I think I also share the sentiments expressed by my fellow panelists. Let's reignite the spirit of civic duty and also ensure that participatory democracy becomes reality and becomes meaningful to ordinary members of the community. The Constitution indeed does obligates municipalities to involve community members in the affairs of local government. So we have to find ways and means to express our sentiments, our views, perspectives as part of building our constitutional democracy going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much to my panelists, and thank you very much to all those of you who attended, and also a special thank you to my good friend Zolani Zonyane, who is an expert in his own way in relating to the matters of public assets and public policy and public policy making, who's been tweeting some of these conversations. Thank you very much, Zolani, much appreciated. This is part of an ongoing series of conversations that the Kagiso Trust has decided to put together in order to promote active citizenship. We will be scheduling a few more conversations over the course of the year, so please do pay attention to our Twitter page. But you can also find some of the work that has actually been done by the Kagiso Trust over the past few years in relation to really driving the concept of active citizenship. So please do check out some of that information and perhaps even giving us some ideas on what we can cover in future Twitter spaces. On that note, my name is Kasi Tole. Thank you very much for having joined us, and have a wonderful evening. Until next time.